So just to kick off with an opening question for you, Peter. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Barbara.
Peter, I think the recent FCA ruling on the COVID-19 business interruption case, it didn't only make headlines in our industry publications, but in the mainstream media as well. And I think it's safe to say that it was probably the first real good news story that our industry has had since March. Can you walk us through what the High Court ruling actually was?
Okay, certainly it was some good news. It wasn't all good news, and unfortunately it wasn't fully reported correctly. So let me give you an overview of where we are at the moment. At the beginning of this, when claims started coming in against insurance companies for business interruption, they were generally all rejected by the insurance company, saying this isn't cover that is in force. The FCA, who regulate all insurance companies, could see this was going to get messy and actually took the fairly unusual view of taking a test case to court. This was a good idea because it shortened the process and actually made it clearer for everyone. They were joined in that action by the Hiscox Action Group and also the Nighttime Industries Association. They could only take a certain number of policies to court, so they picked 8 insurers, and there are around 60 insurers throughout the country providing cover. Remember, this wasn't solely about the events, this was for any business that has business interruption insurance. Out of the 8 insurers, they took 21 policy wordings. Now, there are estimated to be about 700 different business interruption policy wordings on the market, so you can see it is only a small proportion, but the ones they took are the ones that actually they thought were most likely to pay. The court looked at 3 key areas. Is there cover under what is called notifiable diseases cover under business interruption? Is there cover under a denial of access section? And then finally, the trends, if they actually do pay the claims, how much are they going to pay and what's that going to be based on? On the denial of access, which is more offered under policies for things like if there's a fire next door and you can't get into your premises, the court generally ruled, and again, I can only give general things because the actual judgment was 162 pages and covered lots of different scenarios, and a solicitor I was speaking to said this is one of the most complicated judgments he's ever seen. So under denial of access, generally the court went in favour of insurers and said that claims were not valid under this section. In respect of notifiable diseases, this came in 2 different classes. Some policies just purely list out specific diseases, and obviously as coronavirus was not known at the time, then that disease is not listed and those policies won't be paying out. However, some of the policies did actually say any notifiable diseases, and in general the court has said that those policies are going to have to pay out. It then looked at trends, and the insurance company had put a case forward that even if they did pay, they used a legal precedent called the Orient Express Hotel case. That was a case in America which was, but actually came through British courts, and it was to do with hurricane damage to a hotel. It was agreed that actually the damage to the hotel was be covered, but they then argued that because there's a hurricane in the area, even if it hadn't closed, there would be no business, and therefore there'd be no business interruption claim, and the court upheld that. In the High Court case this time, they actually overruled that. They said the judges would not actually have dealt with it that way, so that's a great benefit for policyholders. What it actually says is if your claim is going to be paid, it'll be based on your future trends before coronavirus came in. They also just looked at what they called hybrid policies, where they had a mixture of the denial of access and notifiable disease cover. Hiscox were one of the main ones offering this, and again, generally they said that these policies would need to be paid. Since the High Court ruling, only one of the insurance companies, RSA, have agreed under one of their policies that they will be paid, but that policy is a specific scheme insurance and doesn't cover the events industry. So that's where we are as at the moment.
So Peter, Is it correct to assume that on the basis of that ruling, businesses can claim now?
Okay, so what's happened is that, not surprisingly, in view of the millions that this case is going to cost for either insurance companies or for people not having their claims paid, it was always going to go to appeal whichever way the judgment went. All parties have actually agreed that they won't go to the appeal court. They've actually will go directly to the Supreme Court, which again shortens the whole process, and the Supreme Court will be the final ruling. Now, actually only 2 days ago, they actually announced the date of that. So that's now set for the 16th of November. It will last 4 days, and don't know when the judgment will come out, but we must hope that it comes out before Christmas when the final judgment will come out. So as far as sort of claiming, the best thing is to do is actually wait for that case to come, because none of the insurance companies will be paying until that case goes to court for the Supreme Court.
So Peter, obviously you've taken us through the scenario where it was only a very limited number of policy wordings that were actually taken into court. Is there anywhere that businesses that might be online with us today can easily check if their policy falls within the framework that was ruled to be upheld?
So on the FCA website, they have got the list of policies. Most of them they've referred to by codes, because most of the policies were not the standard insurance ones. So the standard policies issued by your big insurers, Aviva, AXA, Zurich, those policies were not taken to court. It was mainly ones which were scheme policies for specific trades that were taken to court, as these had generally the wider wordings, and I say it's the ones with the wider wording. So once this gets resolved in court, there's going to be a big job for the insurance companies to actually decide which of those their policies match that other ones, the ones that have been to court. So at the moment, I suggest hold on. The insurance companies have been told that once the decision is made, anyone who may have a policy that does provide this cover where they've already sort of said no to, they will need to contact again. So there will be a duty on the insurance companies to come back to those. But I would hold on and speak to your insurers after the Supreme Court, and maybe after they've had a little time to actually digest it.
Okay, looking to the future, is it safe to assume that insurers are obviously going to be tightening up their policies massively to prevent future claims around COVID-19 and other communicable diseases?
So what's happening at the moment generally is all insurers have made it clear that under both property and business interruption sections, this isn't covered in the future. They've always said that their intention was never to give cover against pandemics. So their view is that they weren't giving it. And to be honest, they couldn't afford to give it, because in an incident like this, it could actually bankrupt some of the insurance companies. But of course, sometimes they've not actually drafted their policy wordings well, and this means that actually there may be cover. So they're now clarifying it's not covered under those sections. Under employer's liability, legally, these cannot be actually excluded, so cover will continue under employer's liability. Under public liability, there is a variation in the market. Some insurance companies are excluding coronavirus claims. Some are still providing cover. Some are looking at each risks individually. And obviously things such as festivals, maybe where there are a lot of people involved, they won't be providing cover. So it is a variable at the moment, and you do need to sort of try and get the cover with an insurance company that will provide it.
Okay, brilliant. I noticed that there's a couple more people have joined since I opened. We're going to move on to our next broad topic. If I could ask, if you've got further questions on that specific topic or any of the ones coming up, there is a Q&A chat function. If you could pop your questions in there. I notice a couple coming into the chat, which I'll pick up as well. But we obviously want to make time at the end for you to ask questions as well, things that I might have missed asking Peter as we go along. Okay, so Peter, moving on. Understandably, there's a huge amount of focus in the industry currently around government guidelines and restrictions being the major barrier to events being staged. I think campaigns like We Make Events and some of the other ones have mirrored my thought, which has been that I think there is a second huge barrier to us recovering, and that is whether we are actually going to be insurable as an industry moving forward. I think the Southampton boat show, which was cancelled at the 11th hour, was probably the cautionary tale that none of us in the industry wanted to see happen. And I wondered, Peter, could you kind of give us your thoughts on the whole topic of insuring events in this COVID climate that we find ourselves in currently?
Well, of course, if you go back a year, you could easily take out a cancellation insurance for your festival, conference or event, and you could obtain cancellation cover. And if you paid extra, then you could get cover against communicable diseases, and this would have been a communicable disease and therefore covered under the policy. In the present climate, surprisingly, that's no longer available, so that does make it very difficult to plan events. You can get cancellation cover against various things such as weather and other disturbances, but at the present time you can't get any cover against diseases, which is obviously the key area for people at the moment.
Okay, so Peter, that's not brilliant news. Is there any hope for our industry for this to change moving forward?
I think in the immediate future there's no foreseeable chance of that changing. My thoughts are that even if there's a vaccine coming in, insurance companies are still going to be very nervous, and it's going to take a while to provide that. However, there are other things that are happening. There's a group set up which at present is called Pandemic Re. This is a group of insurers talking to the government. Now, there is history in the past of this working, with the government coming in as an insurer of last resort, which I think is the only way that this is finally going to get covered. Back in the 1980s, insurance companies said that the risk of terrorism and these substantial bombs, they could not continue to provide that cover. And there was actually a insurance company set up called Pool Re, which is backed by the government, which provided terrorism cover. So insurance companies could provide the cover, but if the claims actually got excessive, then the government would actually come in. And this gave policyholders the satisfaction to know that actually they could get that cover. More recently, in respect of household insurance, the government has backed a plan called Flood Re, and that is for houses which can't get flood insurance cover. So there's two previous examples of this happening, and I do think that probably Pandemic Re, or whatever it might finally be called, will take off. Interestingly enough, in Pool Re, because since it was set up there haven't been the major bombs, Pool Re at the moment has got £6.5 billion in reserves, which the government would love to get its hands on but couldn't. So there is always the chance, of course, that the government will try and tie this Pandemic Re to Pool Re, so actually they've got that backing of the £6.5 billion. Whatever happens, it will need legislation, so it's not going to be quick, but hopefully it will get rushed through, because I think this is the only way it's going to probably get resolved. There is another group called Let Live Thrive, which again, insurance companies are talking to the government. I don't know a lot about that group at the moment, but I know it's there. So there are two different avenues at the moment that are being explored, and hopefully one of those will finally come off.
So a little bit of a silver lining, hopefully, coming our way. Okay. So Peter, if we look at, there's probably one event that stands out as having had the foresight to specifically take out coverage for pandemics, and that is Wimbledon, which I'm not sure if everyone on the call is aware of kind of what they did. It's probably interesting for most of us to understand what the cost implications of cover like that would cost, and is it even still available moving forward?
So Wimbledon, you can never get the full figures from, because they are confidential, from insurers, but it is rumoured that Wimbledon are going to be paid out in full for the cancellation of their tournament. The rumour is that maybe £100 million cover they had for that, and that will be paid out. Is also rumoured that their premium for the year was over £1 million. So, you know, that's the biggest event. It shows what insurance companies will be paying out. There were obviously a lot of smaller events that also took out the cover that will be claiming, but that's the one that's in the headlines at the moment.
Okay, great. So Peter, can we talk a little bit about public liability insurance? You touched on it earlier. Can you kind of talk us through what that landscape looks like for us at the minute in terms of who's offering, who's not, what it looks like?
So, as I say, it is in a state of flux at the moment. Public liability, why do you need the cover? If you organise an event and someone actually does catch coronavirus at the event, they could sue the organiser for not taking correct precautions. So that's why the public liability is required. There are other situations where that happen as well. And I say at the moment, it is available, but it's not under all policies. So you do need to actually speak to the insurance companies to actually talk that through.
So looking at our kind of process that we've always traditionally followed to secure public liability cover for ourselves as companies, freelancers, and also for specifically for events, is the process still broadly the same as it was, Peter? Has it become more rigorous? You know, are we needing to jump through more hoops? And do you have any kind of hints or tips to kind of help us make sure that we do qualify for the coverage?
So I think the insurance companies are going to be looking, obviously, a lot of this more closely. So what is important for event organisers to do is to provide as much information as possible to show that they're actually really aware of the problems, to show that they've thought about it, and to spell out actually what they've done. So it's showing that they are a much better risk than the average, to show an insurance company that, yes, we thought about it, yes, we've taken every possible step, and to make certain that is presented to the insurance company. So that's the important thing to do at the moment, to do, and probably to do a lot of that before you even talk to the insurance company to start with, to get that information together.
So obviously one of the challenges in that I could imagine, Peter, is making sure that you're completely compliant with local authority and government guidance, which is its own set of minefield to navigate. Would that be correct, that at the minimum you've got to be really familiar with that and make sure that you are ticking all the boxes?
I mean, that would be the absolute minimum. You know, obviously they're looking to make certain you comply with all legislation, but they're really looking to see how you've gone further than that. So you're not just ticking the boxes, you're actually taking it further and doing everything you possibly can.
Okay. What about cost? Can we expect the policies to be more expensive than we've experienced previously?
Well, across all sort of commercial property and liability insurances, really since the beginning of the year, before COVID came in, there have been rate increases coming through. Insurance companies have been sort of losing money in the last year or two, and so these increases were coming through. Generally, they're not substantial other than in specific classes of insurance, but for normal liability, they've not been substantial. At present, there's no signs that further increases are going to come through. However, you do think that if finally the insurance companies do pay out millions or even billions on business interruption claims, then they're probably going to be looking to claw that back from some areas. So possibly in the future, but not at the moment. On the employer's liability side, it's really the same as the public. There were increases going through, but nothing specific more at the moment, and no more increases.
Okay, great. So just before we move on to a different topic, should we briefly cover off employer's liability? Is there any impact currently on that?
So employer's liability, the claims probably haven't been coming in yet, whether they will or not. Because obviously there are going to be a lot of redundancies. When people get made redundant, they do sometimes go and see no win, no fee solicitors, and the fact that maybe they did catch coronavirus, even though it wasn't from at work, will they look to see if actually they can claim against their employer? Probably some no win, no fee solicitors will be out there to actually encourage those claims. So I think that probably they will start coming in.
Okay. Great, thanks for that. So once again, I see a couple of questions coming in on Q&A. Thanks, everyone. We will get to those shortly. We've got a couple more topics we wanted to cover off, and then we'll jump straight into those questions. So obviously this one, I think, is probably close to all of us, is within weeks of the industry shutting down, I think most of us were rapidly looking for ways to reduce our costs and our overheads in the absence of income. Peter, could you walk us through what we actually do need to keep in place insurance-wise, and where there may be opportunities to legitimately reduce or cancel policies?
So, of course, it is really difficult because companies, either their turnover has nosedived completely, or in some cases it's actually gone to zero. However, they've still got a lot of equipment that still needs insurance. They might still have employees on their books, so legally they still need employers' liability insurance. Public liability, it might be safe to think that actually we're not trading, so maybe we don't need that. But of course, you've still got the risks maybe of someone coming to your premises and injuring themselves, or once things start to sort of move up, you go and do some site surveys or discuss with people, so the public liability will be needed there. So on the liability insurance, the key areas on there are, for premiums, are wages and turnover. Now, we know those dived, and generally people actually look to sort of their budget for the year to put down as their estimates. I would really recommend that at present you do take the worst case scenario. You take the view, well, if nothing picks up, let's declare the wages and turnovers as they are at the moment. That will keep your premiums down to a minimum. If things do pick up, you can always increase it later. You won't be not insured if you've given a genuine figure at the beginning. So keep it low to start with. You will find that some insurers have minimum premiums, and because of that, you may fall below that, which means you might now need to change. You'll also find that some insurers aren't actually keen on reducing premiums. They're not that flexible, which means you might need to look around. In respect of equipment, as obviously that's the main thing that's still in your warehouse, you still need to include that. Probably during this period, many companies have been taking the time to actually have a look through their dead stock, and have got a pile of dead stock in their warehouse, but at the present time there's really no market to buy that, so it's not a time to sell it. So you can not insure that, but you have to be clear with your insurance company, because the insurance company will want everything in the warehouse insured. So to take out the dead stock, speak to your insurers, and it may be this can be done. They will probably want either an inventory of the dead stock or an inventory of the livestock to make it absolutely clear. That is a bit of work, but will probably save you premiums and is worth the work. So think about that. Finally, it's just reviewing the other covers that you've got. Travel insurance, generally people have been cancelling this because obviously there's not a need for that. So think about whether you want that, and just to start it up again when you start traveling. Directors and officers is another one that is a cost. The claims under this are increasing and are more likely to come in. So it is an area that if you can manage to keep it, I would suggest you keep those policies in force, because it'll also be more difficult to take them out again in the future.
Okay. Peter, you touched on travel insurance. Obviously, I've been on a number of industry forums for the past few months with more time on my hands than normal. And I've noticed the travel insurance topic pop up a couple of times. There are some companies lucky enough to still be doing some business internationally, particularly with Asia. And I've seen flags around travel insurance becoming a problem. Is there anything or any policies you can point to that might be helpful for people who are still managing to work overseas and internationally at the moment?
So again, it's an area which is varying between insurance companies as what they do offer. However, it is possible out there to get COVID cover, both for illness whilst you're traveling and also for cancellation before. So you might have to look around, but those policies are out there at the present time. Do need to check the policy cover. What they won't cover is disinclination to travel. So if you decide that things are getting worse and you just decide not to go when events aren't cancelled or the flights aren't cancelled, you won't get cover against that. And you won't get cover against traveling against Foreign Office advice. So those areas you're never going to get cover against. I think it's also worth looking at that the business policies, if you are a business, the business policies tend to provide a much wider cover than if you've got a personal insurance policy. So the chance of getting a claim paid are probably far better under a business policy than under a personal one. But yeah, you know, the travel ones are picking up again and the cover is being reinstated. and we are getting there on the travel side.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move into our last topic now, and following that, we're going to jump straight into the Q&A with everyone online with us today. So Peter, last question from my side. Making sure that as business owners and as freelancers, we're properly covered in the event of a serious accident is becoming an increasingly difficult landscape to navigate. Can you offer any suggestions for us today to make sure that all of our coverage is robust enough to withstand litigation?
So I know we don't want to talk about extra costs at the moment, but this is something to think about for the future. The last thing you want is your company to actually survive through coronavirus and actually come out of that still as a company, and then have an incident where a liability claim comes in and you haven't got cover, and your company will fold because you've not got sufficient liability cover. We still see clients with £2 million cover. I would never recommend at present, even for a one-man band, to have less than £5 million cover at the moment. And certainly you need to be thinking about 10 million for companies, or even more. Just looking at examples, the Soho Theatre claim was now, I think it's 2014, it was several years ago. This is where someone at the theatre fell from a height onto the stage and became a paraplegic. Substantial injuries, which were the fault of the actual theatre. That claim got paid out for £3.4 million. Since then, the Ogden tables, which is decide how courts settle claims for substantial injuries, have actually increased. That person was under 40. Probably if it came to court now, that claim would probably double. Just to give you an example of one we've had in our own brokerage, this was not an event case, but it was a construction case. Someone was seriously injured on site. Unfortunately, it meant their leg being amputated and other serious injuries. This case took 6 years to come to court and was finally settled for £6 million. Now, 6 years ago, they had public liability insurance for £5 million, which maybe wasn't that unusual, which means they would actually be facing the bill of £1 million. Luckily, in this case, they're only partially responsible, so their own bill was less than £5 million. But it does show that you need to think about two things. These are just injuries to one person. What happens if several people get injured, which is quite easy in the event? Also, the fact that they're actually not going to go to court for several years, and you're going to be looking at what courts are paying in a few years' time. A solicitor has actually sent me some examples they've had of typical cases, and just looking for someone who maybe, say, lost a foot, you're talking of at least £1 million for that. Spinal injuries, for where it is sort of paraplegic, average claims can be £5 to £10 million for one person. And even just someone who's in chronic pain, so they've not had a loss of a limb, but are in chronic pain for the rest of their life, claims for that are likely to be between £1 and £3 million. So these amounts are increasing, and sort of it is an area that just need to have a think about. The costs for additional liability insurance aren't always excessive, so once you're back in that position, please have a think about that.
Brilliant, thanks, Peter. Okay, so that's kind of covered off the agenda we set for today, and now I've seen there's a couple of questions come in. Let's start with one from Chris Cicciarello. Hi, Chris. Nice to see you on here today. So Chris's question, Peter, is appreciating that costs will be high. Are there any insurers moving forward who will quote against business interruption due to pandemics, or is it still too early to say?
At present, none of the insurance companies are actually providing that cover for the sort of the business interruption side. And I think the only way we're going to see that is if Pandemic Re come in and actually step in and provide that cover. I can't see the insurance companies providing that in the foreseeable future. So we've got to push the government to get this Pandemic Re up and running.
Okay, and so I think for those of you who might have just tuned in, there are a couple of the industry-wide campaigns that are part of that process. So I think if you are participating in those campaigns, it's an interesting one to kind of keep your eye on and keep pushing for. Pandemic Re is an initiative which is a model that mirrors previous ones for other things like terrorism and flooding, which were established and have kind of been hugely helpful in resolving interruption like we're experiencing now with COVID-19. Okay, so next question is from Gary Payne. Hi, Gary. Gary's question is, where do you envision prices for all classes of business, taking into account losses in respect of event liability exposure?
So, as I said earlier, they are going up. So whatever business you're in at present, you're probably seeing minimum increases of between 5 and 10% on your commercial premiums. There are certain areas that are being rarely hit. Directors and officers and professional indemnity are the two big areas that are being rarely hit. But as I said earlier, at present, we haven't seen any reaction into the market due to coronavirus. So there are no increases going through at the moment because of that. But I think time will tell, and we'll have to see sort of what the exposure is. You know, the public liability claims generally, I think, haven't been coming in at the moment. So we've got to wait and see. So at present, no more increases other than what would have happened even without coronavirus generally.
Great. All right, next question is from Francis Kavanagh. If an organizer gets cancellation insurance, will it cover lost wages for smaller contractors and freelancers?
Okay, so cancellation cover, you sort of got various options really as to what you actually get cover against. So you can either purely cover your outgoings that you've paid already, or you can get it wider to cover loss of profits. In respect of sort of small contractors, this will really depend in many cases on your contract terms. If you're contracted to pay them anyway, then it is a genuine loss and you can get cover. If, however, you just want to be beneficial and sort of think, well, the freelancer's lost out and I'd like them to get paid, then no, that won't. So it would need to be a sort of a contract term that you've agreed you're going to pay this to the freelancer regardless, and then it is a genuine loss to the event and the business and can probably be claimed under your cancellation cover.
Okay, great. And the last one we have at the moment, we've got another one coming in, so that's good. So penultimate question at the moment. We do still have time, everyone. So if you'd like to add questions, please feel free. We still do have some time. So a question from Ronan. Not sure if you've covered this, but what of claims under professional indemnity insurance? Any examples?
Hello, Ronan. Professional indemnity is interesting. Personally, I've not seen any claims come in as yet. This is obviously going to be against advice given. Now, to be a claim under law, there's got to be negligence. So I think for events in the past, because this could not be foreseeable, then generally there won't be valid claims under professional indemnity. I think there's probably going to be more claims coming in the future, because if you're a consultant or advisor for an event, you need to actually be taking this into account. And it will be probably the ones in the future where events are run and things go wrong, and they're then looking to actually sue the consultant advisor, that the professional indemnity claims will be coming in. The professional indemnity insurance market is actually in a mess at the moment before coronavirus. In some classes of insurance, we were seeing a standard 50 to 100% increases on professional indemnity policies. So it's an area that is struggling, and they're not afraid to hit clients if they think it's going to look bad. So, but I think it will be the future. And so I think that when your renewals come up, you'll probably find there are more questions asked about what precautions you're taking and what events you're doing and how you're getting involved in these events. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. If anybody wants to expand on their questions, please feel free to drop that in here as well. And at the moment, our final question for today is from Clive Layton from Public Eye Music Group. Does Peter think that policy costs will deter large-scale events, music festivals from proceeding? That's a really pertinent question.
It is. The horrible answer is probably yes. But possibly more, rather than the cost, is actually whether you can actually get any cover at all or not. And I say the disease cover is the big issue. Are you prepared to run a festival if you can't get the full cover? And people will take a view on that. Certainly costs, I think, will be going up. The event organisers are going to have a hell of a time next year. Nothing is going to be certain. And I think that actually this large scale events, yes, is going to be a problem. The insurance companies probably aren't going to help much at all. Again, pandemic might be the answer, but whether that's actually going to come in quick enough is another problem.
Okay. All right. So we do have a little bit more time. So, here we go. Louisa, hi. Are all bets off for group travel insurance covering COVID for next summer?
No, I think is the answer to that one. Those covers are still available. Quite surprisingly, maybe, but you can get cover. You've got to remember that, if the airline cancels, then the claim's not going to be under your policy because the airline have been cancelled. Most policies do still have a general exclusion that actually, if a country actually stops people coming in, so USA stops people coming in at one point, that's probably not going to be covered. But pure sort of cover against illness from COVID and either whilst you're on holiday or actually catching COVID before, so you have to cancel the trip, those covers are available at the moment.
Right. Anybody else? Any questions? Oh, nope. I think that looks like hopefully we've covered off most of your questions properly. Thanks to everyone who's kind of sent questions in. I think it's always helpful for all of us to just look at different aspects that we potentially hadn't considered. I think we've come to a natural conclusion for the session. So a huge thank you to everyone who's dialed in today. And a very special thanks, Peter, to you for kind of making this webinar possible and for sharing your expertise and time. I know personally for me, the last week kind of chatting to you has kind of been really insightful and helpful in terms of some of the major questions I've had. I think if there are more questions that you have or come to mind in the next few days, there will be a post follow-up sent out to all of you, and Peter's contact details will be on those if you're looking for specialist brokerage or support kind of moving forward and how to future-proof your business insurance-wise. And I think also wanted to just flag one last thing. On the 18th, in a couple of weeks' time, there's going to be another really interesting panel discussion, which is kind of segues quite nicely from this one, which is talking about making your events COVID secure. That will be a panel discussion, and more information will be shared out in the next few days from the centre here. So thanks everybody from my side, and thank you, Peter.
Yep, and thank you all for listening. I hope it was useful to you, and that we can go forward, and we won't have this in a year's time because life will be a lot simpler.
Here's hoping. And stay safe, everyone, as we kind of move back into lockdown. Bye from me.
Thank you.